Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the Netflix true crime documentary American Nightmare. So briefly, American Nightmare chronicles the case of Denise Huskins, a young woman who was kidnapped when an intruder dressed in a wetsuit broke into their Vallejo home. Dubbed the Gone Girl case, Denise was demonized in the press for staging a kidnapping in order to get revenge on her boyfriend Aaron for remaining in contact with his ex-girlfriend. The three-part documentary relies heavily on interviews and reenactments. Overall, I thought it was a very entertaining and a very well-paced documentary that did not overstay its welcome. And I did appreciate how it tried to put us in Denise and Aaron's shoes to see things from their perspective. Personally, I was unaware of the case. However, my only takeaway was always ask for a lawyer. Like if you're ever brought into questioning, just ask for a lawyer. It's really that simple. When I heard the term Vallejo, I was automatically triggered. I don't know if you've all seen the movie, like the David Fincher movie Zodiac, but from what I know of the Vallejo Police Department, they're not that competent. This case was crazy because not only were the police skeptical of Aaron and Denise's account of what happened, but they totally just dismissed them from the very beginning. They never even entertained the thought that they could actually be telling the truth. And one of the reasons the police were so convinced that Denise and Aaron were lying or that something wasn't right was because of a movie called Gone Girl, which had come out a year before the kidnapping. So the movie stars Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike, and in the movie, Amy, played by Rosamund Pike, stages a kidnapping in order to get revenge on her husband, who is cheating on her. And the police are very convinced that Denise used the movie for inspiration to stage her own kidnapping. This documentary was very triggering because it just felt like a lot of what took place could have easily been prevented. Like there's a difference between having something happen to you and then having to prove that something horrible happened to you. And there's a reason why people don't like to report crime, because they don't really want to be accused of being the criminal. And it's sad to say, but this happens a lot more than we would like to believe. Like when you think about the number of people who have been wrongfully convicted, and what's even more scary is the number of people who do report crimes, but they're totally dismissed. So I felt this documentary did a good job of kind of unpacking why. The documentary series is 3 episodes and each one is incredibly jam-packed. The first episode introduces us to the investigation as well as the relationship between Denise and Aaron. The second episode basically unpacks what happened to Denise in the aftermath. And the third episode focuses on the kidnapper, Matthew Mueller. The first part of the documentary did a very good job of really trying to get us inside of Denise and Aaron's head, like really kind of putting us in their shoes and trying to get us to feel what they felt during this time. So their ordeal begins when a man in a wetsuit breaks into their home and kidnaps Denise. We later find out that the intended target was not Denise, but his ex-girlfriend Andrea. It's never really explained why the kidnapper knows so much about Aaron and Denise or why the intended target would be Andrea. Like my initial impression when the documentary started was it felt like somebody hired this man, and it's never clarified whether or not the kidnapper was working with other people or if he was just a perverse individual working alone. So when Aaron goes to the police station, he tells the officers everything. And my impression of Aaron is like he definitely has had very limited contact with the police. He's under the impression that if I just cooperate, if I just tell them everything, surely they'll get to the bottom of this. Worst case scenario, they have to launch a manhunt. So one way or another, this this will get resolved. And much to his surprise, not only do the police dismiss him, they believe that he is responsible for her death. And I understand why the police were skeptical. Like his story was very, very far-fetched. However, what was unacceptable is dismissing him completely. They turn off his phone. They make no attempts to trace any of his calls. And during her captivity, Denise was assaulted twice. And had they tracked his phone, they could have saved her from the second assault. And I think what was terrifying about how the police conducted themselves is they totally dismissed the kidnapping. Like they were under the impression that she was already dead. They never even entertained the thought that there was a woman out there in desperate need of help, in desperate need of assistance. Instead of sort of using their resources to make sure that this woman is safe and sound, they utilized all their resources to prove that Aaron was guilty of a crime. Like at one point in time, they put him under a lie detector test and lied to him about the results. And again, they have absolutely no proof that he's lying, and yet they insist, right? They keep pushing and pushing. The relationship between Denise and Aaron, I'm not gonna lie, does feel like something out of a true crime documentary. So Aaron and Denise met at work after Aaron broke up with his ex-girlfriend, who also works, at the same place. And so I can't imagine like the level of tension here. So before her kidnapping, they have this massive argument regarding Aaron's ex-girlfriend. So it seems like Aaron and his ex had a very nasty breakup. However, they were still texting, they were still in contact, and this was a source of tension between the couple. The police did interview Aaron's ex, and we find out that she was dating an FBI officer on the case, and this was never deemed a conflict of interest. And so this angle is never really properly explored. It's like a complete dead end. Like, they keep coming back to it, but they never really add anything to it. Denise's time in captivity was absolutely horrifying. We find out that she was kidnapped by a man named Matthew Mueller, a Harvard law graduate who was later disbarred. This man had a very long history of perverse behavior. He started off as a peeping Tom and eventually graduated to kidnapping and assault. The documentary interviews other victims who recount details very similar to Denise's case. And what's really disturbing is Matthew used to live in the same neighborhood as Denise and Aaron. And what's crazy is the police never looked into similar cases, because had they tried to do their jobs and investigate, they could have come across Matthew. Like, he did have a record. He did have this long history of really perverse behavior, specifically in that very neighborhood. And the documentary doesn't give us a lot of information about the kidnapper. Like, again, we don't know whether or not he was working alone. Like, how do you go from Harvard law graduate to this? And I think the reason that the documentary doesn't deep dive into his life is because they want to keep the focus on Denise and Aaron's experience. Even after Denise is released from captivity, she tries her best to cooperate with authorities, again in hopes that maybe if they have all the information in front of them, they will start to see things from a different perspective and hopefully catch this man. Instead, they refuse to see things from any perspective. They start to attack her, they start to demonize her, to the point where they actually hold a press conference telling the entire world that they believe that this was a hoax. And because the press gets all their information from the police, they also go with the same story. And I would argue the press was equally responsible and equally malicious, because the way they reported this story, it was as if like this was a tabloid story, right? Calling her cold-hearted, comparing her to Gone Girl. Like, they never bothered to see if there's anything more to the story. And the documentary does interview a crime reporter, and this guy was basically like, I didn't know what to believe. I was confused. Like, it was a different time. And the only reason they start to believe Denise is because the kidnapper starts sending emails, essentially outing himself. Now, why this man started sending emails, again, we don't know much about him or his mindset, but it's very clear he either wanted to be caught, or at least he wanted credit for his work. But these emails basically change everything. And because of these emails, we're introduced to a woman named Officer Misty. And she's the only person that believes Denise, right? As soon as she's exposed to this case, immediately her police instincts start to kick in. She knows that there's something very wrong. And she really had to work hard to bring this man to justice, right? She is making phone calls. She is being ignored. And I think the fact that it took such extremes for the FBI and the police to take this seriously really shows how susceptible authorities are to tunnel vision, not just in terms of investigating a case properly, but like blaming the victim for a crime, right? Like, they already had a story in their head and they just refused to move, and they refused to really see it from any other angle. And I think this documentary did a very good job of trying to put you in Denise and Aaron's shoes, like try and get you to really think about how you would feel if you were put in that situation, if the police are calling you liars, if the media is basically comparing you to some sociopathic character in some movie. Like, what would you do in that situation? And when you're listening to them talk, you can tell they're very much still traumatized by what took place. And again, it's sad to say, but this happens a lot more than we would like to believe. And there's a reason why people don't like to report crime, because they don't want to be accused of being the criminal. Like, this does happen. And so overall, I highly recommend this documentary. And you guys let me know what you think.